Hi, Wayne Allyn Root. Welcome to Crush House Legends. And we interview some of the great retired athletes in the world here every week. And it's a great honor to have Jim Leyritz with us because he's my guy, right? I'm a Yankees fan since the day I'm born in Mount Vernon, New York, on the Bronx borderline, just a stone's throw from Yankee Stadium. And Jim led the New York Yankees to 2 World Series championships. And then, by the way, came back as a catcher for the San Diego Padres and led them to the World Series against my Yankees. Of course, we beat you, but he was he was in 3 World Series, 2 World Series championships, came close to winning 3 rings. He is a legendary catcher in Major League Baseball and a clutch hitter who was always there with a home run at the right time in the late innings. And that's what I remember about you, Jim, Mr. Clutch.
Yeah, I was very blessed to be in those situations, to be having opportunities to come through. And as a very young kid at 14 years old, a friend of mine and a friend of yours, Pete Rose, gave me some advice that was the best advice ever. And it was, whenever you get an at bat, whether it's the first day, a practice game, or it's the World Series, treat that at bat as the most important one, and you'll never get caught up in what's going around you. And that was kind of the mindset that I had, and I was fortunate to be able to be in those big situations and to be able to come through most of the time.
Well, we discussed this on your podcast yesterday. I was a guest on Jim's podcast yesterday, and I came back to that very comment. And I said, Jim, I was not a world-class athlete, and I never made the major leagues. I was a pretty good football player in high school and college, but I didn't make the big leagues. But I got to tell you something. That's been my exact philosophy in business. Every single meeting, every single thing I do in business has got to be the best. You got to be focused. You got to give 110%. You got to have all your energy. You got to have your game face on, because every meeting could be the most important one that changes your life. And one mistake could change the direction of your life in a negative direction. And one great meeting could change your life in a positive way. So I'm with you and I'm with Pete Rose. It applies to everything in life. Give 110%. Always be hustling. Charlie Hustle. So thanks, Pete Rose, for that advice, and thanks, Jim, for sharing it with us. I know that you were an Ohio guy growing up, and so as a kid, you loved the Cincinnati Reds, and you became a great catcher, so I got to assume Johnny Bench was a great influence in your life.
Well, it's bigger than you know. I didn't tell you the story the other day, but Johnny Bench, I was a 14-year-old kid, and we were in spring training in Tampa. Tommy Brenneman was my best friend growing up. And Tommy and I were there being bat boys one day, and they were doing a Ara Parsegian's World of Sports segment. And it was Pete Rose teaching hitting and Johnny Bench teaching catching. And they had to pick a kid to be kind of their dummy to go through all the drills. And I was praying to God that Pete would pick me because Pete was my idol. And he ended up picking Tommy, and I got to do catching with Johnny Bench. Now, at the time, I was disappointed. I think back on it now, and I'm like, wow, Johnny Bench. But what happened was we did the segment. I was working on catching, blocking balls, throwing to the bases, doing all these things that he was teaching me. And when we got done with the segment, he called me over, and he goes, hey, kid. I was 14 years old, and at that time, basketball was my number one sport. I wasn't even thinking about playing baseball.
Wow.
And he calls me over, and he goes, hey, kid, are you a catcher? I said, no, Mr. Bench. I want to be like Pete. I want to play the outfield, third base. And he goes, you're crazy. He said, catching is the quickest way to the big leagues. And you got some pretty good skills there. And again, I wasn't totally buying into it. And then all of a sudden, he takes off his catcher's mitt, he signs it, and he hands it to me. He said, maybe this will help. And from that day on, I went home that night, and I told my dad, I'm going to be a catcher. And one of the irony of the whole story, to make it short, is that the only reason I got re-signed, I never got drafted, but I got signed out of this collegiate league, is because I went back to catching after breaking my leg, out of high school, and I wasn't able to catch the first 2 years in college. When I went back to catching after my 3rd year of college, the New York Yankees saw me catching, and they ended up signing me. And that's how I became a New York Yankee.
What a great story. So Johnny Bench is the reason for all of it. And it backs up Pete Rose's advice, right? Because there's one moment that could change your life. Pay attention, be focused, give 110%, have your energy, have your game face on. That moment that Johnny Bench picked you changed your life. I wonder where you'd be today if Pete Rose had picked you instead of your buddy Tommy.
Yeah. Exactly. It's one of those things
that made the major leagues.
like I said, when I look back at it, Yeah, when I look back on it now, it was funny because 2006, I played in a Hall of Fame game, and Johnny Bench was in the dugout with me, and we were in the locker room, and I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Johnny, how you doing?" He goes, "Hey, Jimmy." We knew each other. We'd done a couple things together, and I said, "By the way, I never really did thank you for my career." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Oh, you grew up in Cincinnati. That's right." I go, "No." I go, "You and I did a TV show when I was a 14-year-old kid called the Aero Park Stations War." He goes, "No way, you're that kid." And I'm like, "Yeah, you gave me the glove." And from that day on, I became a catcher. And the only reason I got signed was because I was catching. I said, "I owe it all to you." And he goes, "Do you mind if I tell that story?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So it was a pretty cool full circle when I saw him in 2006.
And by the way, your life was really patterned after Johnny Bench and Pete Rose. And there you were with Johnny Bench and Pete Rose at the age of 14. And so it's kind of a kismet, I guess you'd say, right? Because you wound up
Yeah,
patterning your
yeah.
career. You were the hustler like Pete Rose.
Yeah, I watched the ball into the catcher's mitt. I ran down to first base on a walk. I slid head first every opportunity I could. And yeah, it was just one of those things that, he really embedded in me at a young age that you play the game 100% because you never know when that last game or that last at bat is going to happen. So treat everyone just as important as the first one.
All right, I remember you for a very unique batting stance. And I never knew till today when you and I chatted pre-interview that batting stance was due to you breaking a foot and you had to come up with a stance
Yep.
that would work in the future and that built a Major League Baseball career. Is that right?
Well, the irony of the whole thing starting back in high school when I was supposed to be drafted, Barry Larkin was supposed to be the first pick in 1982 out of Cincinnati. I was supposed to be the second pick. And 4 days before the draft, I went out and played tennis with one of my best friends, and I fractured my foot. And I came
Wow.
home, and yeah, I came home with a little air cast on. The doctor said 3 to 4 weeks you'll be fine. And I came home, and my dad looked at me and he goes, "Son, what did you do?" I said, "Dad, not a big deal. I'll be good in 3 to 4 weeks." He goes, "Oh no, it's a big deal. I just got a phone call from the Atlanta Braves. They're going to make you one of their top picks, and now I got to tell them that you got this broken foot." And sure enough, the Braves called back the next day, and my dad said, "Yeah, unfortunately, he broke his foot." And they said, "We're going to pass on him, and we'll come back and watch him play in 4 weeks. And if he's good, maybe we'll sign him." So they came back 6 weeks later. They watched me play in a tournament. I did really well, but I still couldn't catch. And they said, "Listen, we'll sign him." And they said to my dad, "How much would it take?" And my dad said, 10 grand. And they said, "We can only give him five." And my dad said, "Screw that. He's going to college." So I went to a junior college in Georgia for 2 years, never got drafted. Went to Kentucky for a year, never didn't get drafted. And then I'm out playing in the summer league in Kansas for Hayes, and the Yankees see me catching, and they end up signing me. But the funny part, Wayne, of that story is those two scouts that were supposed to sign me in Cincinnati. In 1996, the Game 4 World Series that I hit the home run, they were sitting in John Schuerholz's booth in his suite at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. And when I hit the home run, they both looked at each other and said, "Do not tell Schuerholz for 5 grand. We could have changed this entire situation."
That's
So
a
yeah, it's
great
always a great
story.
story to tell.
Uh,
Yeah.
I want to know, as a guy who had those clutch hits, and you know who you reminded me of when I watched Yankee games when you were playing? You reminded me of Tommy Henrich. I don't know if you know that name. Tommy Henrich, he
I know
didn't
the
make,
name, yeah.
he never made the Hall of Fame, but he was a real important piece of the Yankees championship era with Joe DiMaggio and Charlie Keller and Yogi Berra and Bill Dickey. Actually, it was Bill Dickey, not Yogi Berra, Bill Dickey. And they had great teams that won the World Series every year. Tommy Heinrich was the right fielder, and he was known as Mr.
Yep.
Reliable, clutch hitter, or Old Reliable, I think it was, Old Reliable. And he was a clutch hitter who would always go 0 for 3, but then in the ninth inning, get the game-winning hit or the game-winning home run. He was best when the
Yeah.
pressure was on. And that's what you always reminded me of on the New York Yankees.
Well, I had Buck Showalter as a manager in the minor leagues. And then, of course, he became my manager in the big leagues when he took over in 92. And one of the things that him and I fought about from 92 to 95 was I wanted to play every day. And he said to me, he said, "Jimmy, you are more valuable to me coming off the bench in the seventh, eighth, or ninth inning than you are starting. and I can use you in spots that it can help us win a game. And as a young player, that was a nice compliment, but you want to play every day, you want to make money. And I was like, wait a minute. But I did kind of have that reputation through the minor leagues. And then, of course, once I was there, and it was a hard thing to deal with, but also it was pretty good to have those moments and to be able to have some of the clutch moments that I had in the history of the Yankees.
And you repeated it with the San Diego Padres. If I remember correctly, you had some clutch home runs that got them into the World Series against the New York Yankees, correct?
Yeah, I had 3 home runs against Houston in the first round that got us to the Braves, and then I hit another one against the Braves. And then, of course, we beat them to go on to play the Yankees. And unfortunately, we got swept in 4 games by the Yankees. But that was their magical season that they won 125 games. And there was just no way anybody was going to beat them. And yeah, we played them good, but we ended up getting swept in the World Series.
What is that like, by the way, when you win the World Series back-to-back years with the Yankees, and now you're with a different team and you get into the World Series against your old teammates? What was that like? Talk us through it.
Well, so we went in '96, and then I got traded and then in '98 I play against the Yankees. And one of the great things about that Padre team was we got the approval for Petco Park because that team, the community got behind us because it was so exciting to go to the World Series. And so we were proud of that. But then when we got approval for the park, all of a sudden they sold off everybody. They traded Caminiti, they traded Steve Finley, they traded me back to the Yankees in '99, and then we go on to win the World Series in '99. So it was kind of an ironic thing for me to be win a World Series with the Yankees, get traded, win with the Padres, get there but we lose in the World Series, but then get traded back to the Yankees and winning again. It was a pretty good run there. But playing against the Yankees in the World Series was like, playing against my best friends. And the funny story is when we lost to the Yankees, they swept us and they won in San Diego. George Steinbrenner grabbed me in the hallway and said, "Hey, where can my guys go celebrate?" I go, "Wait a minute. You want me to arrange your World Series party after you just swept me?" And he goes, "Yeah, you're the king of New York. You must be the king of San Diego." And I did. I ended up taking 10 guys down to Junior Seau's restaurant and celebrating with the Yankees the World Series. But Sean, the funny story is people always go, "What was it like playing in New York? And what was it like playing in San Diego? What was the difference?" And I said, the funny thing is, when you lose a World Series in New York, you don't leave your house for weeks. But in San Diego, we lost the World Series and we still had a parade. So there's a little difference between
it's funny because that was
New York.
That was going to be my follow-up question to you, Jim, was, what's the big deal about playing in front of New York fans? Everybody in the rest of the country hates New Yorkers. I'm a New Yorker. They seem to hate New Yorkers. We're too intense. We're too negative. We're too high energy. We're too critical. But you played in front of New York. You played in front of laid-back San Diego. Which did you prefer?
Well, people in New York, once you win in New York, people don't forget you. And it was a situation that I was one of the few players back in the '90s that lived in the city. I didn't live out in Jersey or Westchester or New York, or most of the guys did. There was only 1 or 2 players that lived in the city, and I was one of them. I took the 4 train, the subway, to every single game. I had a cowboy hat, cowboy boots. I was a country guy. And it was so funny because my mom and dad would be like, "Well, Jimmy, aren't you afraid to take the subway? Don't people get shot like that?" I said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I got a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. They think I'm packing. They're more afraid of me than I am of them." But the one thing about it is, and anybody that's ever won in New York will tell you, winning in New York you can't compare it to anything. And to be able to win that World Series in '96, to be able to win in '99, walking around New York nowadays, I think it's such an enjoyment because nobody ever forgets those winning teams that you were on.
Sounds like a Frank Sinatra song. Doesn't that remind you of if you can
Yeah.
make it in New York, you can make it anywhere? That's kind of what you're saying.
Exactly.
So very cool. And that's my belief. No matter where I go, people may hate New Yorkers, but you got to admit this, no matter where you go in America, the #1 top CEO and the big business winner in almost every city was born and raised in New York. New Yorkers go to Miami, they become the king of Miami. They go to Cleveland, they become the king of Cleveland. New Yorkers dominate wherever they go. So something about being on those streets of New York makes you #1 wherever else you go. So great stuff. Hey, last question for you, Jim Leyritz, is just the game of baseball today.
Yeah.
How has it changed versus when you played?
Well, it's completely different. It's one of those things that people always ask me all the time. Would you be able to coach in these? And I'm like, it would be very difficult, just because you know when I used to go up to bat, Wayne. It was when I was going up to bat. If I always looked for the biggest hole to hit a ball through, that's where I was trying to hit the ball. Right? It wasn't a matter of going up to bat with a whole side of the infield wide open. I'm like, I could have hit 400 these days, because of these shifts and because of everything else. And one of the hardest things that I had to deal with was as the sabermetrics and the statistics became important. I was like, yeah, these are nice stats, these are nice, you know, but I want to see how a guy reacts to a 98-mile-an-hour fastball coming at his head. What does he do the next pitch? Can I move his feet? As a catcher, I'd be like, does he make an adjustment? Does he change? There are certain things that go on that are important that no statistic could ever tell me. And so for me, that would be the hardest thing to get used to in today's game, is that everything is so statistic oriented that the feel of the game has been lost. And, you saw it happen in the World Series last year where,
Right.
they take, Blake out after he gives up and he's pitching great. And all of a sudden the number said to take him out because it was the third time around the order, and they take him out. And of course, they give it up and they ended up losing the World Series. That was a huge problem. One of the great things I watched, I don't know if you watched it last night, but they had the Field of Dreams game last night with the White Sox and the Yankees. And that was a tremendous event. But the one thing that I love about what's going on in Chicago right now with the White Sox is they have the old school manager, Tony La Russa. And when he was named manager, all of the new statistics, all the sabermetric guys were up in arms, like he can't come back and coach. He's not like us. He's not up to par with all these sabermetrics. And look what he's doing with the White Sox. I think it's a great thing for guys like me that believe in the old school baseball. That it's a great sign that the White Sox are playing great.
All right, Jim Leyritz, great having a conversation with you and reminiscing about a great career, especially a Yankee fan like mine. You're one of the greats, and we really appreciated all those clutch home runs and all those clutch hits and all those World Series victories. Thanks for being with us today on Crush House Legends.
Thanks for having me, Wayne. Appreciate it.
All right, another edition of Crush House Legends is in the books. It was great to hang out with Jim Leyritz. Matter of fact, I hung out with him yesterday and did his podcast, and today he was back on my podcast. So how cool is that? Hanging out with a world champion from my favorite team, the New York Yankees, and a guy who hit nothing but clutch home runs when it mattered. 7th, 8th, 9th innings, this guy was money. This guy was gold. That's my kind of hitter. Jim Leyritz, great to hang out with you, and great to hang out with all of you at Crush House Legends and Vegas Winners. I almost did Vegas Winners first. I always finish up with Vegas Winners because I want you to follow these instructions. You bet on sports, you want to win betting on sports. We give you point spread winners, professional advice. All you have to do is register, and the winning is free at vegaswinners.com. Head there now, register, take you a minute or less, and the winning is free. vegaswinners.com. Another week in the books. Crush House Legends. See you next week.